Today we're looking at a passage, and we're continuing our series through the Pastoral Epistles, which are 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, and we've made it to Titus. And only 36 weeks of messages to get here. And so we're gonna look at a passage where Paul goes over leadership qualifications. And I was actually looking back in my notes, and I'm like, when did we kind of talk about, Timothy talks about something similar, but it was like 15 months ago that we were in that part of the letter. So you've probably forgotten a few things, so there might be a little overlap there. And so we're looking at leadership qualifications, and it really started thinking about what if you're a dude, not a dude, because it seems to be a male thing here, and it really applies to males and females. I'm egalitarian. We've gone into depth more of that about why, how we look at certain passages and how we translate things. I'm not going to get off on a tangent there because I've got enough stuff to talk about without being tangent man. And so that's a tangent. I still remember my math teacher doing tangent and doing like staying alive. And so my whole life I've been able to draw a tangent curve because he did that in front of the class. Don't know if he did that intentionally, but I can now draw a tangent curve, and I just went on one. Anyway. But, we just understand the author sometimes means he or she, but both. And so, kind of like Neil Armstrong, he said this is one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. So don't get caught up in some of the language there. We know, really, the qualifications for leadership for the same males or females. But here's the thing. Also, what if you don't want to be a leader? You can be like, well, that's great. Well, pick a leader that has this stuff, but I can kind of forget about that, right? Like, no desire to be a leader. Like, there's some people who are like, I like being a follower. I like not being in charge. Here's the thing. These are really marks of Christian maturity, too. So if you're a believer and a follower of Jesus, these are some of the things that even if you're not aspiring to leadership, these are things. Because babies are cute. I loved my kids when they were babies. I was just like, oh my gosh, they were just, you love your babies. You're going out to Walmart showing everybody your baby, you're everywhere you go. And it's like, love mine. And I love the kids here at Deepwater. Like, some of them give me high fives and fist bumps every week. You got to get in on the high five thing. It's like, it's awesome. Like, babies are really cool. And it's a privilege to see them grow. But here's the thing, 50-year-old babies, not so much. Like, I know I've known some guys who are immature at 50, but, hopefully there's some maturity. And so we start out in faith as a baby, if you will, as a new believer, but there should be growth along the way. And so these are sort of some benchmarks for that. I saw an online video today, or no, not today, a couple days ago, and it was like, there was like a 70, I think the guy was like 73. Now you guys are going to try to figure out which. It was like 70-plus-year-old man got mad at some 20-year-old for some perceived thing that went on. And anyway, the 70-some-year-old ended up getting charged because he's the one that ended up breaking the law and all kinds of stuff. And the 20-year, and it was kind of like not a good look, right? Because it was just, the guy was having a fit and all kinds, and the 20-year-old was being so calm. I was just like, it should be reversed, right? Like, as we age, we should mature. And now I'm grateful that at my lowest moments, no one had a video phone or anything. Like, that's the benefit of being a little bit older is, the stupid stuff we did, no one got on film. And, we all had bad days. You could be an awesome, cool dude, but not at that moment, right? And there should be maturity, and there should be, growth as we go. And so think of these things as we hit into what the leadership of the church is going to look like as kind of goals or targets, spiritual benchmarks, things that we want to see in ourselves, and the things that we want to see in leaders as we pick leaders. But they're things that, spiritual growth benchmarks, you need sometimes a goal. And we were joking, we had the men's conference yesterday, so you hear a few thoughts on that. We went up to Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, and we went to this men's conference. It was great. And, we were talking on the way back, we were talking about working out in gyms, because as you get a little older, you have to kind of start working out, not because you want to look good on the beach, but because you want to still have some strength as you age. And we were joking, a friend of mine who, runs one of the gyms I go to, I always irritated him so much because he would say, he'd want us to set goals, and all the young people are setting goals. I'm like old. I'm like, my goal is to not die, or to die quickly when I get there. But, but it's better if you're playing a sport or something. And for years, I always did, competitive sports most of my life, and there would be a goal. And once you had a goal, you would work hard to achieve that goal. And so think of these for some of you as maybe goals, because maybe you're not there yet when we hit some of these characteristics, but these are things that you could aspire and grow towards. And so I'm going to read the whole passage this time, even though it's a little bit longer, because I think it just gives us a greater sense of the whole thing this time. So this is Paul writing to Titus, who's on the island of Crete, which we'll have more about Cretan culture and some interesting things next week as we go into the rest of the letter. Paul says, I left you on the island Crete so you could complete our work there and appoint elders in each town as I instructed you. An elder must live a blameless life. He must be faithful to his wife, and his children must be believers who don't have a reputation for being wild or rebellious. A church leader is a manager of God's household, so he must live a blameless life. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered. He must not be a heavy drinker, violent, or dishonest with money. Rather, he must enjoy having guests in his home, and he must love what is good. He must live wisely and be just. He must live a devout and disciplined life. He must have a strong belief in the trustworthy message he was taught. Then he will be able to encourage others with wholesome teaching and show those who oppose it where they're wrong. So, Titus's job is to appoint elders. And that's really, as the church developed, as it spread around the ancient world there, the church needed more godly leadership. And last week we talked about, what church leadership should look like, and the idea of servant leadership. And it's often very different than how we see leadership things in the United States. But Paul goes on to describe an elder. And again, it's not just for elders or pastors, but these are marks of Christian maturity. It's not just a position in the church, not just age. Somebody, when you say church elders, you're thinking, oh, well, they're the older people there. And there often is a chronological component to that, because as we age, we should be maturing. Although I've met some older people who are not very mature, even though they've gone to church their whole life. But an elder is this role of not just dominance. Like, we tend to think of leadership as like people who are like out there, they're alphas and they're getting it. Not dominance, but protection and care. And so I like what this commentator said. He said, notice that most of the qualifications involve character, not knowledge or skill. A person's lifestyle and relationships provide a window into their character. Now, I have worked with a lot of... I feel like I'm the old guy at this point. I've been around the block a few times, It's when I was younger, it was like I worked in lots of different Christian organizations, and we moved around. We're from here. We're as from here as you get from here, I'm probably related to some. If you're from here, we're related. We just haven't figured out how. We talk Kent County genealogy. You find out you're related to people all the time. You're having a conversation. You're like, wait a minute, I think we're cousins. Again. Right, sis? Oh, no, but that's fine. My wife and I went on our honeymoon, and we met some people, and they're like, what's Delaware known for? I'm like, like chemist, DuPont, taxation things, and we marry our family. Right, sis? And one of the couples, I think they really thought I was not kidding. Anyway, I love Delaware, but it's a funny place to grow up. But here's the thing. I've worked for other leaders. And I remember one, I specifically remember, and this has happened in a few contexts, and you talk about, especially when you're working with youth and you're trying to recruit more people. And so there was always sort of this tension, because I worked with people who wanted to recruit people who are just charismatic, and they're good with people. And I thought that's great. I mean, we don't want uncharismatic people who are terrible with people as leaders. But I was like, I think the qualification needs to be godly first. And I ended up running into tensions with this person, because they would recruit leaders based, we'll try to get them Christian after they're leading. And I'm like, the problem is all the damage they create along the way. And so I think character comes first. And I'll always take character and commitment to God over competency. Because you can be a great leader, but you can't lead anybody further than you are. You can't lead people to be a follower of Jesus if you're not following Jesus. You can't lead people into maturity if you're not mature. And so whenever we look at leadership, whenever we look at, we need to look at not just skills, but character. Because authority and power tend to tempt corruption, right? Like when you have authority and power, if you're not a godly person, it often brings you into dark places and you begin to see it the wrong way. So, and it's important because, sometimes you have people who are like a good preacher, but not a good liver. And so you need to be someone who preaches the word, who understands the Bible, but also lives it out. And I don't want to problem is sometimes when you've been in Christian leadership for a long time, it's like the Wizard of Oz. Like I've been behind the curtain. And there's some people who are like gifted communicators, but not so gifted with the way their life is, right? And I'm not saying that because, everyone else is wrong or that, but you really, these character things count. These character things matter. And not just with your Christian leaders, but really with us, because there is this tendency to kind of preach and to live one way, but sometimes live another. We're all like a little bit of a hypocrite, right? Because we know the truth, but we don't live it. And there needs to be less of a disconnect between what we believe and how we live, because what we believe should affect how we live. It says live a blameless life. It's blameless is, someone said it's like live in a way that, things don't stick to you. It really not be, like someone who's not able to be indicted of criminal charges. I was reading all these different ways of putting it. In other words, is this someone who's free from scandal? It doesn't mean that, they haven't ever been accused of things, but are they living in a way that you can't be accused? Because people know how you live. Now, that's always like a dangerous tension, because there's some people who have a reputation for being good and godly who do bad things too. So I kind of a caveat there. But you want to be, you want to be live in a way that we live differently. We look different. And you must know and live the message. There's an old saying, the blind leading the blind. We've all probably heard it. It's reminiscent of Matthew 15, where Jesus is telling people not to do what the Pharisees are doing. And I love it because he calls them like hypocrites. And that's, I tell you, you're a hypocrite because, some of you are offended. That's okay. You can be offended. But we're all like a little bit of a hypocrite. Jesus, though, he kind of lashes out at the religious leaders and he's like, hey, you're a hypocrite. And then I love this in Matthew 15. Verse 12 says, then the disciples came to him and asked, do you realize that you offended the Pharisees by what you just said? I kind of picture Jesus looking at him like, yeah, that's why I said it. Because maybe they needed to be offended to get to where they need to go. And Jesus replied, every plant not planted by my heavenly Father will be uprooted, so ignore them. They're blind guides leading the blind. If one blind person guides another, they'll both fall into a ditch. And so there has to be, we have to have spiritual sight. We have to we can't be the blind leading the blind. And so in Christian leadership and in maturity, we need to be people who really live this thing out. And, it's funny. Most of you, if you've been here a while, know I like books. I have a slight amount of books. I'm slowly putting them into a library database thing because I've gotten more books. I got a free book the other day. I was this thing. I was, free commentary. And I'm like, man, I don't think I have this one. I got home. I have it, not only a physical copy, I got a digital copy. And now I've got 2 physical copies. And aren't you jealous? I'm not getting rid of it yet, but I will find someone that I love books, and I like business books too. Like I read mostly theology and stuff. I have a very kind of targeted thing that I like, biblical studies and theology. But I have a whole shelf of business books, and they can be good resources. You kind of modern marketing skills. You can learn to recruit people, learn to manage, innovate, all these things, and we need to be skilled. To help the church, but we need more than that, and there's times, inspiring speakers, we need more than just inspiration, we need godliness, and godliness is the number one goal, and so character counts, When there's no character, those with great leadership skills often build great organizations, but not godly organizations. In recent history, I could probably name a few, and I'm not going to, because if you go on any Twitter feed of any day, you'll see it. If you Google it, you'll find it. And my whole, I remember right before as I was becoming a Christian, there were a lot of big Christian scandals, if you will. And a friend and I were kind of talking about one the other day that happened in the 80s. And it's there's all these cases where people build great organizations, but they don't have integrity. And I'm not to say that if you build an organization that's big, you don't have integrity, but we often see it, right? Because again, they're one thing on the outside, there's something else. We could all probably name one, and probably all of us could kind of picture something that we've seen personally even, where there's kind of this disconnect. And I've mentioned the book before, but a good book that I like on Christian leadership, and it really helps with leadership in general, is The Dark Side of Leadership, Samuel Rima, this book I really love it really kind of shows that often kind of the things that drive us are brokenness. They drive us to the top, and we don't deal with it. And so even people who are Christian, their insecurities and issues can drive them to perform, but they don't kind of deal with it. And really, we need godliness when it comes to leadership, but also in our personal lives. We need to be people who are godly. It says he must be faithful to his wife. Now, it doesn't mean they must be married. Elders can be single or widowed. Just can't be going outside of the marriage. And in Roman culture, in Roman kind of, they wouldn't be considered adultery if a man had relations with a slave, a concubine, or a prostitute. Like it was a very kind of loose definition of what that would be. And so Paul is in the middle of this very liberal culture of saying all these things are okay. He's going, nah, you gotta just be with your wife. And it's not to exclude single people. We would gladly welcome Jesus or Paul here, who were both single. They could be elders in our church if they showed up. They're pretty good examples of things. And actually, Paul and Timothy were both single. So really the emphasis is on sexual fidelity, which can be a challenge for men in that culture, because again, it was okay to cheat, but it's occasionally an issue in our culture too, right? If you don't think it is, you probably have lived with your head under a bucket or something. I don't know. There was an old tweet that I found it. I had a little more time this week, and I found it. Which was a tweet I mentioned, I can't remember, a few weeks ago in a context, but it said, there was this woman who tweeted, she's like, so a man decided, as a Christian woman, didn't want to pursue me any further because I was committed to celibacy till marriage. A Christian man. While I understand different sexual ethics, this has happened multiple times and confuses me to no end. And it got a lot of comments and retweets. And the Bible paints a different picture of our sexuality. I know whenever I mention sex, people are not sure. There's half the church wants you to preach more and talk more about it. The other half is really uncomfortable about what you're going to say. And we don't worry, we keep it PG in here. And I would give you a warning if we had to go over PG-13. But the truth is, a lot of us live as sexual atheists. And what I mean by that is, again, Craig Rochelle wrote a book, and it was The Christian Atheist. And meaning there's parts of our life that sometimes we don't want to give over to God. And so we'll live as a Christian in all these different aspects, but this one I'm going to keep to myself. That one I'm keep. But really, and Jesus calls us to live this full life. Jesus said, I come that they may have life and have it to the full. And really to have a full life is to give all of your life to Jesus. And it may be difficult to live in these ways, but it's a better way of living. It's a better way of life. And when we live that way, we'll find more life. We were at the men's conference yesterday, and a friend of mine was speaking, and he was talking about sexual fidelity in marriage. And a lot of men and women struggle with, today, porn. Because it's so accessible. I don't want to say, in my day, you had to look for it. Today, you have to try to look away from it. Because it comes to your phone. It comes to your internet searches. And so it's a different way you have to be challenged. I've been on a website and been like, whoa, why are those ads there? And you're like, I'm going to get off of that website. Because it's out there. And now I don't know, he didn't give me an actual citation for the statistic, and I was trying to Google it this morning and find it. But a lot of men and women struggle with porn. He said, by a study he was reading, up to 54%. And it's men and women that struggle with this. And I loved his kind of thought on that. Have you ever had a food that you really liked, and then you didn't eat it for a really long time, but then you kind of lose the craving? And so, he was kind of likening that to, if you don't have a long time, you kind of lose the appetite for it. And he's like, you really need to discipline your life in such a way that if that's a struggle for you, you lose your appetite for it. Now, if sexuality is not your struggle, there's other aspects, but, it's like, I like sugar. And, when I start, I get a little off on my diet occasionally because I like food. And so I'll get off, and then I'm like, oh, I need to get more disciplined with my diet. And, you kind of come back to it. And there's certain foods that I know I would like if I went and tried it, but I don't have the strong craving when you've been off of it for a little while longer. Like, I like to go get those cheap vanilla cookies at Walmart. And I like to throw them in a bowl and pour in milk in the whole container. I mean, some of you are thinking of the sugar shock you might get. Right. But, when we indulge, I think we increase the appetite for that. Because if I do it one day, I want it the next day. And there's a lot of things that we do that are not healthy for us, that are not the way God would have us to live. But when we indulge in them, we grow that appetite. And we need to kill that appetite. Like Scott said this, and I get to quote Scott Kramer for those of you who are there. Don't view just only as a sin to avoid, but as an appetite to starve. And then I love what he said too. He said, your thought life will someday control your actual life. And so a lot of times we think we indulge in thoughts and feelings and stuff, and ultimately those will hurt us and harm us and kill us. So more on that maybe at another time. He said his children must be believers who don't have a reputation for being wild and rebellious. Sort of the principle there is you must manage your faith in your home before you can manage it in the church. And a commentator said, it is no virtue to be engaged in public work that the result is the neglect of those at home. All the church service in the world will not make amends for neglect of a church official's family. And probably most of us have seen this where someone's so involved in the church they don't manage, they think, oh, I'm managing God's stuff. Well, the stuff you probably need to manage is your kids at home. And there's an importance to that, really have to go, are we managing their household? They show up, help out, and discipline. And so some pastors will ignore their family for the ministry. Like, I'm sure you've seen that. I think my generation has gotten a little bit better at it because we've seen such a disaster with the generation ahead of us. But some dads, though, and I'm sure moms too, but I see a lot of dads, will ignore their family for work. That's wrong too. And so a Christian leader, a Christian disciple needs to be engaged in the home as well if you have children. And, my marriage, and my kids are my first ministry. When my kids were little, I went to the sports stuff. I answered their phone calls. I answered the phone call in group the other night. I was like, we're finishing up, and I'm like, I got to answer this because they don't call. When your kids call you today, it's important because they text you. And if they called you, you're like, hey, there must be something. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been in appointments, and I'm like, they're calling me. I need to, what has happened? Is Jesus just came back and they saw him? I don't know. But order of loves in my life is, number one, I love Jesus. I love God. And that's my first dedication. My wife comes second. She's okay with that. Because both as we grow closer to Jesus, we grow closer to each other. And so they know I love their mom, but they know I love them. And y'all come in fourth. I love y'all, I really do. But Jesus comes first, my wife second, my kids, then you. Now, the reality is I have a job and I work here, and there's times that I do have to tend to things. I can't be like, my kids want to go play catch. Yeah, but you got to lead the Bible study, Jeff. you got to go to church because, we're expecting you to preach. But, really, it's ordering things properly and not be arrogant. Really, the longer you live, I think, and follow Jesus, it's like you really learn to be less arrogant, because even the gifts and the talents I have are given to me by God. And we tend to be people who look at other people's stuff, and kind of, we tend to look at things, and it's easy to not be humble. As Muhammad Ali said, it's hard to be humble when you're as great as I am. Really, Jesus is this example of humility, right? He was everything he could be. And we read recently the Philippians 2. Jesus was God but lived humbly, took on the very nature of a servant. He serves us. And some dudes act like they're God. Jesus, who was God, acted like he wasn't. Now, he lived godly life. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying the humility of it. Like, I would struggle to be that humble. But he's not. He humbly comes and saves. Not be quick-tempered or violent. James 1:19-20 says, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. Human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. We often talk about, when you be Jesus-y, we remind people Jesus flips some tables. Here's the thing, though. You're not Jesus. Probably your desire to flip a table is not over the right things, right? I'm not saying you can't be angry at injustice, but we often get angry more at things that bother us, right? Like someone, I think driving is the perfect example. Someone cuts us off, we're all about, they've wronged me. In reality, maybe they were just lost. Maybe they didn't see you in the mirror. I remember one time this dude ran me off the road. I just visited a church. I went into the median. I pulled back up, and he's like waving, I'm so sorry. Now, I was good that day because I just come from church. But, it's like we tend to get angry. No, I'm not saying you should run people off the road, but we tend to get angry when we perceive injustice towards us. And usually it's a selfishness. I'm not saying you don't get mad. You should get mad at sex trafficking. You should get mad at abuse, all those things. But often the things that we really get angry about have more to do with us than God. So signs of maturity. Deleting that comment you just typed out. Online? Anyone ever type out a response and then go, gonna delete that one? Or maybe that post you started and you're like, maybe that's not. Not throat punching people when you want to. But here's the second one. It's not wanting to throat punch people. And there is this growth we have. I'm not saying you won't struggle with it, but getting to a different place in your mind, allowing the thought that, maybe they were created in the image of God. I think sometimes we do that. We sort of demonize the other person, but they're created in the image of God. And I've found in life that, if you meet someone under a different circumstance, you might be friends. Like, you ever been cut off by someone, then you realize it was your friend? One of you cut me off on the way to church today. Now you're all wondering, was it me? No, I'm kidding. And so sometimes maturity, though, is getting faster to the desire to throat punch to prayer for them. And so, I understand anger. I've been angry several times in my life. But we work on our character, being conformed to Christ, being Jesus-y, and we should get better at these things. And often I think we get angry at people because we forget that the battle is not against flesh and blood, but spiritual things. And so sometimes we demonize people who believe different things, but they're trapped in a different belief system they don't understand. And so we get mad at people, but we should be praying for them. Not a heavy drinker. People who habitually get drunk. If you go out for dinner and have to call an Uber or Lyft every time, maybe you need to rethink some things. Ephesians 5:18 says, don't be drunk with wine because that will ruin your life. Instead, be filled with the Holy Spirit. Don't be drunk with wine or filled with wine versus filled with the Spirit. People are full of drugs and alcohol, I can tell you. You can tell when someone's full of, substances. There's outward signs. With the filled with the Spirit should be commonplace. We should be controlled by the Holy Spirit. We fill our lives with all kinds of things, right? Like, this is like a complicated thing. We start talking about, counseling issues, but, we fill our lives with wine, food, sex, anger. But ultimately, those things don't satiate. Really, the only thing that will make us satisfied in life is God. Augustine said, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, but our heart is restless until it rests in you. Really, that's the only thing that will really satiate and satisfy us is a relationship with God. Yet we constantly try to fill that hole in our heart with all kinds of other things that don't fit. It reminds me of those, remember the shape sorters when you were little? Did you have one of those? We still have ours, and it was you have the square, and you have to put it in the, square peg hole, and the round thing, and you have to put it in the round. Problem is we have a hole that in there that will only be filled by God, but we try to stuff all kinds of other things in there, right? I remember trying to just force pieces in. Anyone else? Okay. It's not what really satisfies. And, dishonest with money. Man, that is a hard one in our culture because we love us some money in our culture, right? First Timothy 6:10, we read that one a little while back. I can't remember when we preached on that. It says, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Not money, but the love of money. And some people craving money have wandered from the true faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows. I can't tell you, it's amazing how many people get off track in life because of the pursuit of money. It's just a tool, but it can easily become a snare for us. And we have to learn to trust, and it's hard. We need to be careful to love people and use money, but we often love money and use people. It's really this challenge and this temptation for a lot of us, and often we get tempted for dishonesty because we want more money. How many people, cheat on their taxes, because they don't want to pay because they want more money. It's something happens. Character weaknesses are like broken bones. Both keep us from functioning our fullest capacity, and both need treatment and time. And so if you're struggling with these things, sometimes, we sit down, we pray with people. You have a pastor. We have prayer support from other people. Sometimes just connecting with even your spouse. And you have to develop a strategy. And, we read the Bible, and that's why we fill our lives with good stuff. And then it's like these small steps taken daily. Must enjoy having guests in his home, or, hospitality. Hospitality is a big deal in the ancient world. And it really was a Christian virtue among other places in the New Testament. Romans 12:13, when God's people are in need, be ready to help them, always be eager to practice hospitality. Jesus said, John 13:20, I tell you the truth, anyone who welcomes my messenger is welcoming me, and anyone who welcomes me is welcoming the Father who sent me. When we travel, you have your app of a choice now, right? Anyone travel now? It's hard to imagine traveling without a cell phone. I used to have to call hotels and make reservations. Does anybody remember that? Yeah. You should probably go get regular checkups if you, if you remember this. And it's I remember calling hotels and making reservations, and I remember walking in going, do you have any rooms? It's awkward and weirdly vulnerable. And I've got a coupon. I've got a piece of paper that says, give it to me cheaper. Now everything's online. It's we do it online. We use an app. In those days, you needed to rely on people. And often the inns were kind of a little seedy, right? I stayed in a hotel in Pittsburgh, and I'm friends with the guy who's the pastor of the church now. And I told him the hotel I lived in, and he's like, whoa. And I was like, yeah, because when I visited your church, it was before he was there. It was I was in college. I walked down to the church that was closest to this hotel. And when people were happy to meet me, but when I told them where I was living, there was a little bit of a whoa. Because it had a reputation that was well earned. We weren't living that way. We were just poor college kids who made a bad housing choice and decision. And we just needed a place for a few weeks till we could move into an apartment. But, there's those hotels, right? And so you had to be careful kind of where you stayed. And so hospitality was, really this critical issue. And, are we people who are hospitable? And, I think I have a heart for, and I love to see, pastors and churches who embrace refugees. I know we could talk about immigration or something. I don't want to get political. But, a lot of people show up in this country with nothing. They've lived in a war-torn area, and then it's how we treat them, and we're compassionate. And it's funny, because sometimes I see the Christian church hating on people from certain countries that we spend thousands of dollars sending missionaries to. a lot of people come to faith when they move here because Christians are real nice to them. And they see faith lived out. And again, it's a complicated social issue. We can talk about it later. You can talk about politics at home or in a small group, but we kind of stay away from the big things here. But, are we loving people? It reminds me, Matthew 25:34, Jesus said, and the king said, talking about, the king will say to those on his right, come, you are blessed by the Father. I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I was naked, you gave me clothing. I was sick, you cared for me. I was in prison, you visited me. And they're like, Lord, when did we do all this? And the king said, I tell you the truth, when you did it for the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it for me. And so there is this compassion and hospitality we should have towards everyone. And we don't even know who the brothers and sisters are. Christian leaders, it says they must love what is good, live wisely, be just, live a devout and disciplined life. We want to see maturity in people. Are they loving God? Are they loving wisdom and justice, not just themselves? Self-control and discipline go a long way in sports, and they really a lifetime of faith too. A strong belief in the trustworthy message he was taught. That should kind of go without saying, right? Like your faith should strengthen as you age. But I think a lot of it takes intentionality to grow your faith. You have to do the things you should do. I had an accidental affogato this morning. And some of you were like really excited. You know what an affogato is? It's like gelato or ice cream with espresso. And so I had just finished my morning espresso when I did a morning bowl of ice cream. And I was there wasn't a lot, and I didn't want to eat it all. I don't want to be that guy. And so, come on, y'all have eaten ice cream for breakfast too. It's Sunday, my fun day. I kind of splurge off my diet. And so I had a cup that I had espresso in, and we had ice cream, which is a rarity in our house. And so I stuffed some ice cream in there, and it got mixed in with the espresso, and it was glorious, delicious. And if you don't know, the mixing of ice cream and espresso sounds like a bad idea, but it is a glorious idea if you love espresso and love ice cream. And my mouth is now watering right now. So is Lewis's. I could see it from here. It's dripping here. If you love espresso and love ice cream, it's a wonderful, glorious. But I made an accidental affogato because there was remnants of the espresso I threw in. It was beautiful. But spiritual things are usually not accidental. They may be serendipitous, you kind of run across, but a lot of spiritual growth has to be intentional. Like, we have to do things to put ourselves in a place where we're going to grow spiritually. One of those things, going to church. One of those things is Bible reading. One of those things is prayer. And it's, they're not, I think they're almost so simple, but it's easy to neglect because we live lives that are very, very busy, right? Like there's always something to do. There's always some place to go. And so if you want to have this strong faith, you have to invest in it. It's like if you want to do anything, you have to work hard, right? Like if you want to be a great marathon runner, you should probably get off the couch and start running, right? If you want to be a great musician, you have to, practice the instrument. You have to do some things. And so we do that for every other aspect of our life. You want to learn computers, you got to study. You got to work. You got to learn a whole new language that doesn't even make sense to most of us. And so there's things that we have to do to excel in other areas, but for some reason when we come to faith, we kind of want it to magically happen. Now, it is magically happening because the Holy Spirit just birthed things into us, that it's like there is God's grace, but we have to intentionally put ourselves in a position where we can grow. A strong belief in the trustworthy of the message. Able to encourage others with wholesome teaching. Show those where they oppose it. At some point, you have to be able to kind of not just learn and grow, but be able to share what it means. And 1 Peter 3:15, it talks, if someone asks you about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it, but do this in a gentle and respectful way. And so, we should be learning to explain our faith. Learn as we study, and ultimately be able to give a reason for this hope we have. And, I think a lot of times, whenever like a newer believer hears that, they're like, like I know I was like, oh no, I have to. And so I'm a studier by nature. I'm finding that out. Like the older I get, you kind of realize more things about yourself. And so I'm like, oh no, I need to study all kinds of stuff. But you know what? Most of what I study doesn't even come up when I'm sharing my faith with somebody, because it ends up being mostly like, hey, this is how I became a believer, and this is, what Jesus does in my daily life and how it's changed me. And man, my friend did this, and it's like it's changing his life. And that's more what people, I think, want to hear than, I have questions about the Textus Receptus and the translation of the King James Version. And now, I'm nerdy. I like that stuff. but a lot of what we share in our faith is just sharing, why we believe and, for us. So kind of looking at all this, I was kind of, looking at Christian maturity and everything. I was like kind of, at the end, kind of, after we study the Bible and the verses, I'm always like kind of going, okay, what do we do with this? Like how does this change my life? And, if you're young and single, I was thinking about how this really applies to often choosing a spouse. It's been said, men marry women hoping they won't change. Women marry men hoping they will change. Some of you will, if you've been married, will chuckle a little there. I'm not sure it's always true, but it was kind of funny because, often truthfully, in dating relationships, we often choose because we like the outside, right? Like we like the package. That's what Denise chose. No. No, I don't know why she chose this. Anyway, but it's like we tend to, a lot of times we focus on the wrong qualities, especially when we're dating. And so if you're younger and you're listening to this, we choose the wrong things, and then marriage doesn't turn out like we thought it would. And I was thinking about, hopefully this analogy works. It would be like going to the store and choosing a pretty pot, and then just throwing some gravel you gathered in the parking lot in and go, I hope this grows a tree. Versus you go to a nursery and you buy like a nice potted plant, and maybe it's got that ugly black pot. You can work on that. But we often are more concerned with what the outside looks like, the containers, than what's really on the inside. And so if you're choosing a spouse, don't just buy the pretty pot. It's like we have to look at, are these characteristics beginning to grow? Because if you're a Christian and you want to find a Christian spouse, you need to look at, are these things growing? Because they need to start growing. Again, it may take a while for perfection to come. I'm still working on it, and I've been following Jesus for a long time. But you'll see these things grow. But, if you don't see them growing, don't be surprised later when they aren't growing. If you're married, I think you can really encourage these things in your wife or your husband. It's sometimes putting people around the right people, and I think encouraging habits. I think one of the coolest things, my wife and I, we talk scripture all the time. It's like we'll send each other verses, and I send her a ton of memes. But then some verses and things that we're doing, and it's one of those. You encourage growth in your spouse. You can get on them about all the ways they're not Christian. I wouldn't recommend it, but encourage what you see, and that'll help with growth. And I think for all of us, it's really, are we this kind of person? Do our lives line up to these? And, some of the times it's just reading the scripture and having like a certain area kind of stand out and go, man, I really need to grow in this. And so then, again, being intentional, this list is not meant for condemnation. If you kind of went, man, I failed in 3 of these, right? Like I'm not even growing in there. It's not meant for condemnation, but it's meant to encourage you to grow in your faith. And so we take these things and we look to, create growth goals. Growth goals. It's easy for other people to say, apparently. 2 Peter 3:18, growing grace and knowledge. And that's the Christian life is this journey of growing in grace and knowledge. And we can't command things to grow, but we can place things in conditions where they grow. And so put yourself in a place, in a position where you can grow in your faith.